Number 4. Santiago Flight 513. Santiago Flight 513 was reported to take off on September 4, 1954 from Aachen, West Germany. It was supposed to land in Porto Alegre, Brazil the next day. However, it never made it to its destination. The plane mysteriously disappeared. To make things even more bizarre, 3.5 decades later, the Porto Alegre airport noticed an unauthorized aircraft circling around in the sky on October 12, 1989. Air traffic controllers attempted to contact the pilot but were unable to reach them. After some time, the plane made a perfect landing, and the engines were still up and running after it touched base. You may think there's no way this could be the same plane from 1954, but what they found when they opened the plane doors will shock you. Inside the perfectly functioning aircraft, they found 92 skeletons in total from those on board. Captain Miguel Victor Curry was also all bone with his hands still tightly gripped on the controls. Strangely, officials and eyewitnesses refused to comment on the sudden reappearance of the missing Flight 513. Nobody could confirm what had happened or where the plane had been for the last 35 years. Paranormal researcher Dr. Celso Atello said that the only plausible explanation for this absurd event is that the Santiago flight had almost certainly entered a time warp. However, he doesn't seem to have any clue how the pilot was able to land the plane with such ease, given the fact that he was a skeleton. Unfortunately, Santiago Airlines had apparently closed its doors in 1956, and living executives that used to work there didn't know much about the flight and were unable to comment on the phenomena. Several government agencies and officials were said to have investigated this curious case, but they refused to disclose any information they might have found, and they did not give any indication about their investigation leads. The government also did not comment on the claims made by Dr. Atello or whether or not they believe a time warp was involved. Overall, there aren't many details about this incident online, and many people even think it was all a hoax created by a greedy tabloid. But there are records from the Brazilian aviation authorities that do confirm the Santiago Flight 513 did in fact leave Germany in September of 1954. So this begs the question, what really happened to the plane and why aren't there more articles about it on the internet? Could someone be trying to cover something up? Number 3. Tulsa American. A crew of 10 soldiers aboard the World War II bomber plane known as the Tulsa American were in a fight for their lives as they were flying over German-occupied Poland in December of 1944. They were under heavy gunfire and the aircraft was badly damaged by the enemy forces. They attempted to make an emergency landing, but in the end they were unsuccessful. The plane ultimately crashed into the Adriatic Sea off the coast of modern-day Croatia. 7 crew members were saved by local fishermen and rescuers, but sadly, 3 soldiers that had been on board the Tulsa American were not recovered. That is until 2010, when the lost aircraft was finally discovered near the Croatian island of Vis. For over 60 years, the decaying vessel sat at the bottom of the water untouched by human hands. Archaeologists from the Zadar University in Croatia have recently uncovered some interesting artifacts from the wreckage. The U.S. military's Defense POW MIA accounting agency supports the team's excavation efforts, and their main purpose is to discover the remains of missing soldiers. When the plane was found, the whole structure had broken apart into 2 large pieces. Brendan Foley, a researcher who had participated in the recovery effort, reported that the nose of the plane almost peeled open like a banana. The wreckage was full of tangible evidence that could give more insight as to the fate of the aircraft. In 1944, this particular aircraft was known as a sort of a local Tulsa celebrity, according to reporter John Klein of Tulsa World newspaper. It was built at the Douglas Aircraft Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was actually the last B-24 Liberator bomber that was ever built there. The men responsible for engineering this plane had even painted their names onto the sides of the vessel. Throughout its misfortunate journey, the Tulsa American was followed by local city residents who had most likely been devastated to hear about its unsuccessful emergency landing. When the plane was discovered, the team found some things they didn't expect to find. Among many other compelling artifacts, the remains of the 3 lost soldiers that had died when the plane went down have now been recovered. Those working at the crash found remnants of clothing items and military equipment, including a flight boot and a life vest. The remains have not yet been subjected to testing, however, they're hoping to establish a match in DNA that will link the bones to the 3 airmen. The confirmation of DNA analysis will bring an end to the tragic final chapter of the ill-fated Tulsa American. According to Gannon University, there are approximately 73,000 American soldiers who served in World War II that are still unaccounted for. Only 26,000 have been documented as possibly recovered. Do you think you have what it takes to be an archaeologist? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Number 2. Malaysian Flight 370. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 seemingly vanished into thin air after leaving Kuala Lumpur's airport on its way to Beijing. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, was roughly 600,000 pounds, and it carried a total of 239 passengers and crew at the time it went missing. One of the most confusing pieces of information about this disappearance is the fact that these types of planes are typically some of the most successful and safest aircrafts in aviation history. Flight 370 took off at approximately 12:41 a.m. local time. However, at about 1:07 a.m., the vessel's Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS, sent its last transmission and then was subsequently switched off. The final voice communication occurred at 1:19 a.m., and then 2 minutes later the plane's transponder also stopped replying. Civilian radar and the Malaysian military were able to track the plane's flight pattern at 1:30 a.m. as it reportedly turned itself around and headed southwest over the Malay Peninsula. They continued to track the flight as it began to fly northwest over the Strait of Malacca. Less than 2 hours after the aircraft had taken flight, the military's radar lost all contact with the plane while it soared over the Andaman Sea. And although an Inmarsat satellite that was in geostationary orbit above the Indian Ocean received reports from the plane hourly, it was detected for the last time at 8:11 on March 8th. Of course, there were initial searches done for the plane which mainly concentrated on the South China Sea, but it was determined that the flight had turned to the west just moments after the transponder was turned off. However, nothing was found in this area, and so the search efforts were moved to the Andaman Sea near the Strait of Malacca. A week after the plane had gone missing, the satellite's information with the aircraft's last whereabouts were disclosed. On March 24th, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak stated that based on the findings from the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, it was concluded that the plane almost certainly crashed into a remote part of the Indian Ocean. They even estimated the wreck to be around 1,500 miles to the southwest of Australia. If this were the case, it would have been extremely unlikely for anyone on board to have survived the crash. Even after the area was extensively searched, not a single piece of debris was found until July 29, 2015 on a beach on the French island of Réunion. It was identified as the right wing flaperon of the plane, and over the next year and a half, 26 more pieces of debris were found on the shores of Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, Mauritius, and Madagascar. 2 of the pieces were found to be from the cabin interior, which suggested that the aircraft had broken apart. Whether that was before or after crashing into the ocean, nobody knows, and nobody's been able to pinpoint the exact crash site. Since the news of the disappearance of Flight 370 went public, there have been numerous reports of people stumbling across what they believe could be the missing aircraft. One such report in 2015 came from a teenager in the Philippines, the nephew of 46-year-old Jamil Omar of Borneo. Since the young boy doesn't have access to newspapers or television, his uncle told his story. He claims that while his nephew was hunting for birds in the jungle of a Philippine island in 2021, he accidentally stumbled across a body of a plane full of skeletons. Omar told the local police about the incident, and apparently there was a skeleton sitting in the pilot's seat with his safety belt still securely fastened. He continued further by saying his nephew took a piece of fabric to use as a blanket from the wreckage that he later discovered was a Malaysian flag. This detail from the story led many to believe that this was in fact the missing Flight 370. However, unfortunately, this allegation was proven to be false after investigators from the Philippines and Malaysia put an end to the rumors. In the end, there was no substantial evidence to suggest that the plane had landed in the Philippines, and it was never confirmed if the fabled wreckage had been found at all. To further dispute these claims, Filipino authorities stated that they had not received any reports of the incident on the island. And with no solid leads as to the whereabouts of the plane's final resting place, we're still searching for the crash site today. And the remains of those on board the devastating flight are most likely either still inside the waterlogged aircraft or at the bottom of the ocean floor with little chance of ever being recovered. Number 1. North Carolina plane crash. On February 13, 2022, off the coast of North Carolina, there were reports of a plane crash just 4 miles to the east of Drum Inlet. The aircraft was a single-engine Pilatus PC-1247, and it had apparently gone down in the Atlantic Ocean. On board the vessel were the pilot, his adult son, and 6 passengers from Carteret County on their way home from a charity hunting event. The plane was confirmed to have taken off from the Hyde County Airport and was heading south to Beaufort when, for unknown reasons, things took a deadly turn. The pilot was contacted by air traffic controllers trying to warn him that he was about to enter restricted military airspace. They made multiple calls with no response, but after a while he finally replied, stating that he couldn't say anything before because he was trying to get out and was oddly unable to receive any of their radio transmissions. Eventually, the plane was cleared to land at Michael J. Smith Field Airport in Beaufort. However, the controller let the pilot know he was at 1,700 feet when he should have maintained an altitude of 1,900 feet. The plane responded one last time, and then just after 2 p.m., reports stated that the plane was now at 4,700 feet and it was climbing quickly. After the last altitude of the aircraft was determined, all contact was lost between the pilot and aircraft control. No distress calls or declarations of emergency from the plane were reported, and for reasons that authorities could not determine, the vessel went down about 3 miles from shore. Divers discovered the wreckage, and the remains of the passengers were found inside the main body of the plane under the water at about 55 feet. Medical examiners worked alongside law enforcement to identify the victims of the crash so that they could be turned over to family members. It was announced to the public that there was no survivors of the crash. Carteret County Sheriff Asa B. Buck III stated during a press conference that they hope to recover the plane's transponder as well as the flight data in order to correctly identify exactly what went wrong. Charlie Snow, close friend of the pilot, later identified as Ernest Rawls, was interviewed by the Associated Press in February. He stated that Rawls had previously flown for Outer Banks Airlines, which is a company that Snow owns, and that he was highly trained and extremely capable. Since the crash, no reports have been made as to why things took a turn for the worse. However, all the remains of the passengers on board have since been recovered, and those that have been positively identified have been returned to their families. Still, questions remain as to how an experienced pilot could have made such devastating errors to cause 8 deaths in total, and we may never know the answer. What do you think caused the pilot to crash the plane off the coast of North Carolina? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.